At 6:40 on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang before the sun had even come up. I almost ignored it. Not because I didn't care, but because nobody calls that early unless something is wrong. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and saw my father's neighbor, Pauline, calling. My first thought was that my father had fallen again. He was 79, stubborn, independent, and the kind of man who would rather struggle with something for 20 minutes than admit he needed help. I answered immediately. Yolanda? Baby, it's Pauline. Something's wrong with your daddy. I sat straight up in bed. What happened? I heard a loud bang through the wall. I went over, and he was on the kitchen floor. He's awake, but he's very pale. He says his chest hurts. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My father lived only 15 minutes away, but my car was sitting in a repair shop. The transmission had started slipping the night before, and I dropped it off after work. I had told my husband about it twice. I turned toward Terence. He was still asleep beside me. Is he breathing? I asked Pauline. Yes. Is he conscious? Yes, but he's sweating. Call 911, I said. I'm coming. I ended the call and immediately shook Terence's shoulder. Terence! Wake up! He groaned and pulled the blanket over his shoulder. Terence, wake up! It's my dad. That got his attention. He opened his eyes halfway. What? My father fell. He's on the kitchen floor. His chest hurts. I need your keys. I expected him to sit up. I expected him to ask what happened. I expected him to say, let's go. Instead, he rubbed his face and looked at the clock. I've got that sidewalk at 8. I stared at him. What? My sidewalk. 8 o'clock. Terence, my father is on the floor with chest pain. Can't your brother take him? My brother lives in Ohio. He knew that. He had known it for 12 years. My brother had moved to Ohio before I even met Terence. We'd talked about it at family dinners. Terence had visited him. He knew exactly where he lived. But he just stared at me like I was giving him a scheduling problem. I could hear Pauline's voice in my head. He's very pale. His chest hurts. I looked at my husband again. Terence, this could be a heart attack. He sat up slowly. Then he looked directly at me. And he said 4 words I will never forget. Not my problem. Figure it out. There are moments in life when everything seems to go quiet. That was one of them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I just looked at him. For 12 years, I had called this man my husband. I'd shared a home with him. I'd celebrated his birthdays. I'd sat beside him when he was sick. I'd helped him through business problems. I'd used my mother's inheritance to keep his company alive when he was close to losing everything. And now my 79-year-old father was lying on a kitchen floor with chest pain, and the man sleeping beside me couldn't be bothered to hand me his car keys. I said, okay. That's all. Just okay. I grabbed my purse, called 911 to confirm the ambulance was on the way, and ordered a rideshare. As I walked out of the bedroom, I heard Terence say, Yolanda, don't make this into something it isn't. I stopped at the doorway. I almost turned around. Almost. But something told me not to. So I kept walking. The ride to my father's house felt like it took an hour. It was actually 14 minutes. I sat in the back seat staring out the window, watching Charlotte slowly wake up around me. People were driving to work. Coffee shops were opening. School buses were pulling onto the streets. The world looked completely normal. But mine didn't. I kept hearing those 4 words. Not my problem. When I arrived, the ambulance was already there. Pauline was standing outside in her robe. She hugged me before I even reached the door. "He's inside," she said. "They're working on him." I rushed in. My father was conscious. He looked frightened, which scared me more than anything. My father had never looked frightened in front of me. He was the man who taught me how to change a tire. The man who stayed calm when my mother was sick. The man who told me after my divorce scare in my 20s that panic never solved a problem. But that morning, he looked small. "Daddy?" He turned his head. "There you are." I grabbed his hand. "I'm here. I knew you'd come." Those words almost broke me. Because I knew what he meant. He trusted me to come. The paramedics moved quickly. They asked him questions, checked his heart, attached monitors, and finally told me they needed to take him to the hospital. I rode with him. For the next several hours, I barely touched my phone. I didn't call Terrence. I didn't text him. I didn't ask why he couldn't help. I didn't care. My entire world had narrowed down to one thing: my father's heartbeat. At the hospital, doctors told me he had suffered a mild heart attack. Mild. I would never forget that word. Because there was nothing mild about watching your 79-year-old father lying in a hospital bed with wires attached to his chest. He stayed there for 4 days. 4 days of tests. 4 days of monitoring. 4 days of doctors talking about medication, cardiac rehab, and lifestyle changes. And during those 4 days, something strange happened. I didn't miss my husband. Not once. I expected to feel guilty about that. I didn't. I expected to worry about whether Terrence was eating. I didn't. I expected to wonder whether he was angry that I had left him standing in our bedroom. I didn't. I was too busy sitting beside my father. Holding his hand. Helping him drink water. Listening to him complain about hospital food. One afternoon, he looked at me and said, "You look tired." "I am." "You sleeping?" "Not much." He squeezed my hand. "You don't have to sit here every minute." "Yes, I do." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." He smiled. Stubborn. I smiled back. Wonder where I got that from. For the first time that week, he laughed. And that laugh reminded me how close I had come to losing him. That night, after the doctors finally told me he was stable, I went home to shower and change clothes. Terrence was sitting at the kitchen table eating leftovers. Like it was any other Tuesday. He didn't stand when I walked in. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He just looked up from his plate and said, "How's he doing?" I stood there with my bag still on my shoulder. He almost died. Terrence looked down at his food. I know. I waited. Nothing. Then he asked, "Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know." He nodded. And went back to eating. That was it. No apology. No explanation. "No, I'm sorry I didn't help." Nothing. I went upstairs that night and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. Terrence was downstairs. My father's hospital bracelet was still wrapped around my wrist because I'd forgotten to take it off. I stared at it for a long time. Then I thought about something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. The $18,000. 3 years earlier, Terrence's HVAC business had nearly collapsed. A major contract disappeared. A supplier stopped extending credit. He was behind on equipment payments. He told me he was weeks away from losing the company. I had money from my mother's inheritance. Money I had promised myself I would keep untouched. But Terrence was my husband. So I gave him $18,000. I didn't give it as charity. I had him sign a repayment agreement. 5 years. 2% interest. Not because I didn't trust him. Because that's how I handled important financial decisions. He had paid back around $6,000. Then the payments stopped. And I never pushed him. Because he was my husband. But sitting there that night, looking at my father's hospital bracelet, I realized something. Maybe I had spent 12 years treating Terrence like family while he had spent 12 years deciding exactly which parts of my life were convenient for him. The next morning, I opened the filing cabinet. I found the folder. I placed the signed agreement on the kitchen table. And for the first time in years, I read every single line. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply paying attention. And I had no idea yet that this piece of paper was about to lead me to a secret my husband had spent years making sure I would never find. The folder stayed on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I finally opened it. I had seen that promissory note before. I knew what it said. I knew Terrence had signed it. But there is a difference between knowing something exists and finally deciding to look at it with different eyes. 3 years earlier, when Terrence's HVAC business was struggling, I hadn't thought twice about helping him. At least, that's what I told myself. His business had been his pride. He'd started it with one truck, a toolbox, and a phone. Over the years, he built it into something respectable. It wasn't huge, but it paid our bills and gave him a sense of independence. Then everything started falling apart. A supplier stopped working with him. A commercial contract fell through. 2 equipment payments were overdue. He came home one night and sat across from me at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'd never seen him like that. How bad is it? He told me he needed $18,000 immediately or he would lose the company van and several pieces of equipment. I remember going upstairs that night and opening the small box where I kept the money from my mother's estate. That money meant something to me. My mother had worked her entire life. She had saved carefully. She wasn't wealthy. But when she died, she left me enough to give me a cushion, enough to make sure I would never be completely helpless if life suddenly turned against me. I had promised myself I would protect that money. But Terrence wasn't a stranger. He was my husband. So I took out $18,000. The next morning, I placed the check on the kitchen table. Terrence looked at it for a long time. You're serious? Yes. He shook his head. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'll pay you back. I know. He reached across the table and held my hand. You're saving me. At the time, I believed him. Because that's what marriage had always meant to me. You help each other when things get hard. You don't keep score. You don't treat your spouse like a business transaction. But there was one thing I insisted on. I wanted a written agreement. Not because I distrusted him. Because I was an insurance claims adjuster, and paperwork was simply how my brain worked. If something mattered, you documented it. So Terrence signed a 5-year promissory note. The terms were simple. The $18,000 would be repaid over 5 years with 2% interest. Nothing complicated. Nothing aggressive. Just 2 married people putting an agreement on paper. For a while, he made payments. Not large ones. But regular enough. I remember seeing the balance go down and feeling proud of him. He was recovering. The business was recovering. We were recovering. Then the payments slowed. Then they stopped. I asked him about it once. He said cash flow was tight. I told him not to worry. You can catch up later. And I meant it. I wasn't going to harass my own husband over money. So I forgot about it. Or at least, I tried to. Now, sitting at that kitchen table after my father's heart attack, I pulled out the note and calculated what Terrence still owed. About $12,000. Plus the interest we had agreed on. I stared at that number. $12,000. It wasn't just the amount that bothered me. It was what the money represented. My mother. My trust. The night I had watched my husband sit across from me terrified that his entire business was about to disappear. And now, 3 years later, the same man had looked at me while my 79-year-old father was having chest pain and told me it wasn't his problem. I leaned back in my chair. Then I asked myself a question I hadn't wanted to ask before. If Terrence was struggling financially, why had he stopped paying me? I knew businesses had ups and downs. I knew cash flow could be unpredictable. But something about the timing suddenly bothered me. So I opened my laptop. I wasn't trying to investigate him. Not yet. I simply wanted to understand our finances. We had always kept some things separate. That was normal in our marriage. My salary went into our joint household account. Terrence's business income stayed mostly in his business account. We paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and other expenses from the joint account. I had never questioned it. I trusted him. That word felt different now. Trust. I opened our recent statements. Everything looked ordinary at first. Mortgage. Insurance. Electric bill. Groceries. Gas. My paycheck deposits. Then I noticed something. For almost 2 years, my contributions to the joint account had remained consistent. Terrence's contributions had become less predictable. I remembered what he had told me. Business is tight. We're still recovering. I kept scrolling. There were months when he put less into the household account. There were months when he put almost nothing. And yet, somehow, we always managed. Because I covered the gap. I sat there staring at the numbers. Then I opened the business records he had once shared with me. The original HVAC company wasn't doing terribly. It wasn't thriving, but it wasn't drowning either. That made no sense. If the business was stable enough to survive, why was he still telling me money was tight? I checked the dates. I checked them again. Then I pulled out the promissory note. The date of my $18,000 check was right there. I compared it with the business records. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed a gap. 4 months. 4 months after I gave Terrence the money, something had changed. There was an expense I didn't recognize. Not one of the usual suppliers. Not equipment. Not payroll. Not fuel. It was listed under a name I had never seen. I wrote the name on a sticky note. Then I looked it up. Nothing obvious. I thought maybe it was a subcontractor. Maybe a vendor. Maybe I was overthinking everything because I was exhausted and angry. I closed the laptop. Then opened it again. That was the moment I realized something about myself. I wasn't looking for a reason to punish Terrence. I was looking for a reason to believe him. I wanted to find something that would make everything make sense. I wanted to discover that there was a perfectly innocent explanation. So I checked again. I looked through our joint records. Then his business records. Then the payments connected to the old promissory note. The more I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. The money I had given him had supposedly been used to keep his company alive. But the company's records weren't telling that story. There were missing pieces. And missing pieces are dangerous when you're dealing with money. I called my friend Renee the next morning. Renee had known me since we were 19. She was a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and she had a talent for listening without letting emotion take over the conversation. I told her about my father. Then I told her what Terrence had said. Then I told her about the $18,000. She was quiet. How much does he still owe you? About $12,000. Do you have the original signed agreement? Yes. Notarized? Yes. Has he made a payment recently? No. She paused. Yolanda, that's not just money you gave your husband anymore. I know. No. I don't think you do. I stayed quiet. That is a documented debt, she said. You need to keep the original safe. I looked at the folder. Why? Because if something is wrong, you don't want to discover it after the paperwork disappears. That sentence stayed with me. After we hung up, I put the original note back into the folder. Then I locked it in my filing cabinet. But I couldn't stop thinking about the strange expense. The unknown name. The missing money. The fact that Terrence had stopped repaying me while continuing to tell me his business was struggling. And most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about that morning. My father on a kitchen floor. Me begging my husband for help. And 4 words that had somehow changed the way I saw 12 years of marriage. Not my problem. For the first time, I wondered if maybe the money wasn't the real betrayal. Maybe the real betrayal was that I had trusted a man who knew exactly how much I had sacrificed for him. And still expected me to believe his story without asking questions. 2 days later, I opened the filing cabinet again. This time, I wasn't looking for the promissory note. I was looking for anything else that didn't belong. I moved the tax documents. Then the insurance papers. Then an old folder containing mortgage records. That's when my fingers touched something tucked behind the back panel. A thin folder. I pulled it out. There was handwriting on the front. Terrence's handwriting. And underneath the name was a phone number. I stared at it. The name wasn't mine. It wasn't my father's. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It said. And beneath her name, in Terrence's handwriting, were 2 words that made my stomach drop. I stared at the name on that folder for several seconds. Denise Okafor. I had never heard it before. Not once. Not at family dinners. Not during conversations about Terrence's business. Not in passing. Not even as the name of a customer. And yet there it was, written in my husband's handwriting, tucked behind our tax documents inside a filing cabinet in our own kitchen. I looked at the words underneath her name again. Storage unit. My first thought was simple. Affair. I hated myself for thinking it, but my mind went there immediately. A secret woman. A secret phone number. A storage unit. A hidden folder. For about 90 seconds, I sat completely still. My stomach tightened. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. Everything around me was normal. But I felt like I had just opened a door into a life I wasn't supposed to know existed. I picked up the folder. There were 11 pages inside. Invoices. Bank statements. Contracts. Copies of business documents. And at the top of the first page was a company name I had never seen before. Boyd Okafor Mechanical LLC. I read it twice. Then a third time. Boyd. Okafor. Terrence's last name. Denise's last name. I felt a cold sensation move through my chest. I flipped to the next page. There were commercial HVAC contracts. Large ones. Not residential jobs. Not the small repair work Terrence had always told me was keeping his original company afloat. These were commercial accounts. Buildings. Maintenance contracts. Service agreements. And attached to several of them were payment records. I started adding the numbers. 5,000. 8,000. 4,500. 6,000. Another 7,000. The total kept climbing. By the time I reached the bottom of the bank statement, I had counted almost $40,000 in deposits over 18 months. I stopped breathing for a second. $40,000. I looked around the kitchen. This was the same kitchen where Terrence had once sat across from me and told me he was terrified of losing everything. The same kitchen where I had written him a check for $18,000 from my mother's inheritance. The same kitchen where I had watched him promise he would pay me back. And now I was looking at records showing that he had been receiving tens of thousands of dollars through another business I knew nothing about. I didn't know what hurt more. The money. The lie. Or the fact that I had been living beside him while he built an entirely separate financial life. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Terrence's name. I almost called him. Then I stopped. Something inside me said, "Don't. Not yet." I needed to know how much of this was real. So I took pictures of every page. Then I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. I didn't want him to know I'd seen it. Not yet. I took the photos into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. My hands were shaking. I called Renee. She answered on the second ring. "What happened?" "I found something." Her voice changed immediately. "What?" "I found another business." Silence. "What do you mean another business?" I sent her the first photograph. Then another. Then another. She didn't respond for almost a minute. Finally, she said, "Yolanda, don't touch anything else." "Why?" "Because if these documents are what they look like, you need to be careful." I stared at the screen. Is he having an affair? I don't know. There is another woman's name on the company. That doesn't automatically mean anything. I found a storage unit. Still doesn't prove an affair. I hated how calm she was. But that's exactly why I needed her. She wasn't emotionally involved. She wasn't sitting in my kitchen trying to imagine what Terrence had been doing. She was looking at the documents. "What's the date of the LLC registration?" she asked. I zoomed in on the photograph. 2 years ago. "And when did you give him the $18,000? I looked at my copy of the promissory note. 3 years ago. Then we need to compare the dates. I already knew what she was going to say. But I didn't want to say it first. I opened the folder again. The LLC had been registered approximately 4 months after I gave Terrence the money. My stomach dropped. Renee. What? The company was registered 4 months after I gave him the money. She didn't speak. Renee? I'm here. Say something. I think you already know what I'm going to say. I closed my eyes. I don't want to know. You need to. I looked at the ceiling. For 3 years, I had believed my $18,000 helped save Terrence's company. Now I was looking at evidence suggesting that something else had been happening almost immediately afterward. I started checking the financial records more carefully. The first payment into the new company's account appeared 6 months after I gave Terrence the money. Then another. Then another. The account never appeared in our household finances. None of that money went toward our mortgage. None went toward groceries. None went toward the bills we were supposedly struggling to pay. It stayed separate. Hidden. I thought about all the nights Terrence had told me business was slow. All the times he had said, "We're just trying to get through this month." All the times I had covered more of the household expenses because I believed him. I had never questioned it. Because I loved him. That was the part that made me feel foolish. Not that he had lied. People lie. But I had defended him. I had explained his behavior to other people. When my sister once said Terrence seemed secretive about money, I had defended him. He's under pressure. When my father once told me I was doing too much financially for Terrence, I had said, "We're married." When Terrence stopped making payments on the $18,000, I told myself it didn't matter. Now every one of those moments came back to me. And suddenly they looked different. I wasn't looking at isolated incidents anymore. I was looking at a pattern. I called Renee again. I need to know what I should do. Don't confront him yet. Why? Because right now, you have documents. You don't know what else exists. What else could there be? I don't know. That answer scared me more than anything. What do you mean? I mean you found one hidden folder. Don't assume it's the only thing. I looked at the filing cabinet. She continued. Make copies. Secure your personal financial records. Check your credit. Check the joint accounts. And don't move money impulsively. I wrote everything down. Then I checked my credit report. Nothing immediately jumped out. I checked our joint accounts. Again, nothing obvious. Then I went back to the business records. That's when I found something else. A payment made to a storage facility. Monthly. The amount wasn't huge. But it had been paid for almost a year. The same words appeared in Terrence's handwritten notes. Storage unit. Final notice. I stared at the screen. What are you keeping in there? I whispered. I didn't know. But I knew I wasn't going to find out by asking him. Not yet. That evening, Terrence came home around 7. I was cooking dinner. He walked into the kitchen, kissed my cheek, and asked, "How's your dad?" I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the man standing in front of me had no idea that I had just discovered an entire business hidden behind his back. He's doing better, I said. Good. He opened the refrigerator. I watched him. His movements were completely normal. He reached for a bottle of water. He had no idea. No idea that the woman he had been married to for 12 years was standing 3 feet away from him with photographs of his secret company on her phone. He looked at me. You okay? I nodded. Just tired. He smiled. Get some rest. Then he walked upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Only then did I let myself breathe. I sat at the kitchen table. The folder was beside me. Denise Okafor. Boyd Okafor Mechanical LLC. Nearly $40,000. Storage unit. My mother's money. And a husband who had looked me in the eyes 2 days earlier and told me that my father wasn't his problem. I finally understood something. The sentence wasn't the beginning of this betrayal. It was the moment that made me stop ignoring everything that had already been there. I had spent 12 years believing that marriage meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes giving someone the benefit of the doubt just gives them more time to hide the truth. 3 nights later, I decided I was done investigating from a distance. I printed every document. I placed the promissory note beside the business records. Then I waited for Terrence to come home. When he walked through the door, I was sitting at the dining table. 2 folders were in front of me. He looked at them. Then he looked at me. His face changed instantly. What is this? I didn't answer. I simply pushed the second folder across the table. He opened it. His eyes moved across the first page. Then the second. Then he stopped. I watched the color drain from his face. And for the first time since I had married him, Terrence looked afraid of me. Not because I was yelling. Not because I had threatened him. But because he finally realized I knew. I leaned forward. Tell me the truth. He swallowed. And after 12 years of marriage, I was about to hear 3 different versions of the same lie. Terrence stared at the folder for so long that I could hear the clock on the wall behind him. Tick. 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 He turned another page. Then another. Finally, he looked up at me. Yolanda, this isn't what you think. I almost smiled. It was such a familiar sentence. Not because I'd heard it from him before, but because it was the sentence people used when the truth was already sitting on the table and they were trying to find a way around it. What do I think it is? I asked. He looked back at the papers. I can explain. Then explain. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then tried again. Denise is a business partner. I didn't ask who Denise was. You found the company. Yes. It was supposed to be temporary. Temporary? He nodded. It was another business arrangement. That's all. I looked at the bank statements. Then why didn't you tell me? He leaned back. Because I knew you'd worry. That answer almost made me laugh. You knew I'd worry? Yes. You told me your business was struggling. It was. You told me you needed my $18,000 to keep it alive. I did. Then why did you open another company 4 months later? He didn't answer. I waited. He rubbed his forehead. The situation changed. How? Yolanda, you don't understand how commercial contracts work. I understand money. You understand insurance. I understand numbers. He looked irritated. I could see it happening. He wasn't ashamed yet. He was annoyed that I had discovered something he thought he had successfully hidden. That difference mattered. I pointed at the folder. Almost $40,000 came through that account. It's business revenue. Revenue you never told me about. Because it had nothing to do with you. There it was. Again. That same cold distance. The same attitude I'd heard the morning my father collapsed. Not my problem. Nothing is your business. Nothing belongs in your world unless I decide it does. I looked at him carefully. Did you use my money to start this? His face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. No. You're sure? Yes. Then we can compare the dates. Yolanda. The LLC was registered 4 months after I gave you the money. That doesn't prove anything. The first payment came 2 months after that. He stood up. I told you. You don't understand the cash flow. I stayed seated. Then help me understand it. He said nothing. I slid the promissory note across the table. You signed this. He looked down. Yes. You agreed to pay me back. Yes. You stopped. I told you, business was tight. And yet you had a second business receiving almost $40,000. He exhaled. You're making this sound worse than it is. No, Terrence. I looked him directly in the eyes. I'm finally seeing it exactly as it is. He walked away from the table. I didn't stop him. He went into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. Then he stood there with his back to me. Are you taking me to court over $12,000? I'm asking you to repay what you signed to repay. We're married. That didn't stop you from hiding a business from me. You're seriously going to drag our marriage into this? You did that when you lied to me. He turned around. I didn't lie. You withheld information. That's not the same thing. It is when you deliberately hide money from your spouse. He stared at me. Then he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was short. Bitter. Almost mocking. You want to take me to court? I want my money back. You're unbelievable. Maybe. He picked up his keys. You know what? Go ahead. I didn't respond. He pointed at the papers. Take me to court. Then he walked out. The front door slammed behind him. I sat there alone. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. And that frightened me. Because I knew something had changed. I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. I was trying to protect myself. The next morning, I went to Renee's office. I brought every document. She spread them across a conference room table. The promissory note. Bank statements. Business records. The LLC paperwork. The payment history. The demand notices. She looked through everything carefully. Then she looked at me. The note is clear. So I can collect? You have a legitimate claim based on what you've shown me. I nodded. What about the business? That is more complicated. Could I be responsible for anything? Not based on what I'm seeing, but we need to be careful. Don't sign anything. Don't move joint assets without understanding the consequences. And don't threaten him. I wasn't planning to. Good. She folded her hands. Yolanda, I know you're hurt. But don't make this emotional. I looked at her. It stopped being emotional when he told me my father wasn't his problem. Renee was quiet. Then she nodded. Okay. She helped me prepare a formal demand for the outstanding balance. It gave Terrence 30 days to begin repayment according to the terms of the agreement or face legal action. I took the letter home. I placed it on the kitchen counter. I didn't tell Terrence immediately. I wanted him to see it when he was ready. That evening, he came home late. He walked past the counter. Then stopped. He picked up the envelope. His expression changed. You actually did it. I didn't look up from my laptop. I sent the demand. You're serious? Yes. You're going to destroy everything over $12,000. I finally looked at him. No. He waited. You destroyed everything when you decided my trust was something you could use. He dropped the letter onto the counter. You're my wife. And you were my husband when you signed it. He walked away. For the next 30 days, the house became a place where two strangers happened to sleep. Terrence moved into the guest room. We stopped eating together. We stopped asking how each other's day went. The silence was worse than fighting. Because fighting meant there was still something left to fight for. Silence meant we both knew what was happening. Every morning, I went to work. Every evening, I checked on my father. He was recovering slowly. Cardiac rehab twice a week. Short walks. Medication. He complained about everything. The hospital food. The doctor's instructions. The weather. I loved hearing him complain. It meant he was alive. One afternoon, he looked at me and said, "You're worried." I'm fine. He gave me the look only fathers can give. Don't lie to an old man. I smiled. I'm handling it. Handling what? I hesitated. Then I told him. Not every detail. Just enough. He listened quietly. When I finished, he took a sip of coffee. Then he said, "You know what your mother always said?" What? Never argue with someone who has already shown you their character. I smiled sadly. That sounds like Mom. It does. Then he pointed at me. Keep your paperwork. I laughed. That's your advice? Paper doesn't forget what people said. I thought about that all night. 30 days passed. No payment. No call. No response. Nothing. On the 31st morning, I opened my email. There was nothing from Terrence. I checked the mailbox. Nothing. I knew then that I had to follow through. I called Renee. It's time. She didn't ask what I meant. I'll prepare everything. That Monday morning, I filed the civil claim. I remember sitting in the office while the paperwork was processed. My hands were steady. That surprised me. A year earlier, I would have thought filing against my own husband was impossible. Now it felt like the only honest thing left to do. 3 days later, Terence was served at his shop. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. But apparently 2 of his employees were. And within minutes, my phone started ringing. Once. Twice. 5 times. Then 10. I was at work when I looked down. 23 missed calls. I stared at the screen. Another call came in. Then another. 31. 35. 38. Then 41. 41 missed calls from my husband. The same man who couldn't spare 10 minutes to drive me to my father's house. The same man who had told me to figure it out when I was terrified my father might die. Now he was desperate for me to answer. A voicemail appeared. I pressed play. His voice sounded different. Not angry. Not confident. Shaken. Yolanda, please. There was a long pause. We need to talk before this goes any further. Another pause. Please don't do this to me in front of people. I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone face down. I didn't call him back. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because for the first time, I understood something. When my father needed help, Terence had told me to figure it out. Now Terence needed help. And this time, I was the one who had figured something out. I had figured out that I didn't have to rescue everyone who refused to rescue me. That evening, when I pulled into the driveway, Terence was waiting on the porch. The moment I got out of the car, he stood up. You had me served at work. I closed the car door. You ignored the demand. You embarrassed me. I looked at him. No, Terence. He waited. You embarrassed yourself. His face tightened. You don't understand what you've done. I walked toward the front door. He followed me. Yolanda, please. I stopped. He looked exhausted. For the first time, I could see fear in his eyes. But this time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. I opened the door. Walked inside. And pointed toward the dining table. Sit down. He did. I placed the same folder in front of him. Then I sat across from him. Now, I said, we're going to talk about the truth. And for the first time, Terence had nowhere left to hide. The dining room felt smaller that night. Maybe it wasn't the room. Maybe it was the fact that 12 years of marriage had finally been reduced to 2 people sitting across from each other, with a folder full of documents between them. Terence stared at the papers. He looked older than he had that morning. Not physically. Something in his face had changed. The confidence was gone. The excuses were gone. For once, he wasn't trying to convince me that I didn't understand. He simply looked tired. I didn't think you'd ever find out, he said. I let the words sit there. There was no dramatic music. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a husband finally admitting that the secret I had discovered had been a secret on purpose. You didn't think I'd find out what? He looked at the table. The second company. Why? He rubbed his hands together. I was going to fix everything. That isn't an answer. I was going to get Boyd Mechanical stable. Then I was going to pay you back. You stopped paying me before this company even started making serious money. I needed time. You had 3 years. He didn't respond. I pointed at the promissory note. You signed this. Yes. You agreed to repay me. Yes. You told me the money was going towards saving your company. It did. Did it? He looked at me. Some of it. I felt something inside me go completely still. Some of it? He nodded. I had to make decisions. What decisions? I can't explain every business decision I've ever made. No. I looked directly at him. But you can explain why you took money from my mother's inheritance, stopped paying me, hid another company, and then told me my father wasn't your problem. He closed his eyes. I was angry that morning. That doesn't excuse it. I know. Do you? He looked at me. For the first time, I saw something that looked like regret. Not regret for being caught. Maybe something deeper. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. I told him what I wanted. The remaining balance. The interest we had agreed on. Nothing more. I didn't want his business. I didn't want his truck. I didn't want revenge beyond getting back what belonged to me. And I certainly didn't want him to lose everything just because I was angry. I wanted the agreement honored. That was all. The legal process moved slowly. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No judge pounding a gavel. No audience gasping. Real life isn't like that. There were filings. Dates. Documents. Phone calls. Waiting. Renee helped me organize everything. The original promissory note. The payment history. The demand letter. Proof that Terrence had received it. Bank records. Every document had a date. Every number had a trail. Terrence eventually hired a lawyer. At first, I thought that would make everything harder. Instead, it made the truth cleaner. His attorney tried to argue that the money had been part of our marriage and that the agreement wasn't really a traditional business debt. But the magistrate wanted one simple answer. Did you sign this? Terrence looked at the document. Yes. Is that your signature? Yes. Did you receive the money? Yes. Did you repay the full amount? No. There wasn't much left to argue. The hearing was shorter than I expected. 6 weeks later, the judgment came down. The court ruled in my favor. The remaining balance, along with interest, came to just over $13,400. I stared at the number when Renee showed it to me. $13,400. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Because the money had never really been the point. My mother had been dead for years. The inheritance had been one of the last things I had left that connected me to her. I had willingly given part of it to the man I believed would stand beside me for the rest of my life. And now I was getting it back through a court order. That wasn't victory. It was closure. Terrence didn't have $13,400 sitting in a checking account. So a structured repayment plan was arranged. Monthly payments. Formal documentation. If he missed payments, there would be consequences. I didn't have to chase him anymore. The system would do it. The first payment arrived a month later. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table. My hands were surprisingly calm. I took the check out. My father was sitting across from me. He had been recovering well. He was walking farther every week. His doctors were happy with his progress. He looked at the check. What is that? First repayment. He took it from me. He held it up toward the kitchen light. I laughed. What are you doing? Checking for a watermark. I smiled. Daddy. He lowered the check. Then he looked at me. Receipts. I shook my head. You've been waiting to say that. 4 years. We both laughed. It was the first time I had laughed that hard in months. And somehow, that little moment meant more to me than the court judgment. My father was alive. He was sitting at my kitchen table. He was making stupid jokes. He was annoying me. And he was still my father. That was what mattered. A few weeks later, I found out that the second business was falling apart too. Denise had learned about the lawsuit. She didn't want her name connected to Terrence's financial problems. She restructured the business and removed him from the arrangement. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send Terrence a message saying I told you so. I simply heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. The man who had once told me his business was drowning had managed to create another business behind my back. And then lost that one too. Not because I destroyed it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because secrets eventually become expensive. Terrence and I separated 2 months after the hearing. There was no dramatic final fight. No screaming match. No throwing clothes into the yard. We simply reached the point where neither of us could pretend anymore. One evening, he sat across from me and said, "I think we're done." I looked at him. "I think we were done a long time ago." He nodded. Neither of us argued. That was the strangest part. After 12 years, the ending was quiet. Maybe because the real ending had happened months earlier. At 6:40 in the morning. When my father collapsed. When I shook my husband awake. When I asked him for his keys. When he looked at me and said 4 words. "Not my problem." I used to think that sentence destroyed my marriage. Now I realize it didn't. It revealed my marriage. There is a difference. For 12 years, I had filled in the gaps. I had explained his behavior. I had forgiven things that bothered me. I had convinced myself that love meant giving someone unlimited chances to become the person you hoped they were. But that morning taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Sometimes people don't change suddenly. Sometimes they simply stop pretending when the situation becomes inconvenient. My father had needed help. Terrence had chosen not to help. That was the truth. Everything I discovered afterwards simply confirmed it. Months later, my father and I were sitting outside on a warm afternoon. He was drinking coffee. I was looking through some old family photographs. He picked one up. It was a picture of my mother. He smiled. "She'd be proud of you." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because you finally stopped confusing love with sacrifice." I didn't answer. That sentence stayed with me. I had always believed being a good wife meant giving. Giving time. Giving money. Giving patience. Giving forgiveness. But love isn't supposed to require you to disappear. And helping someone doesn't mean allowing them to use you. I still have the original promissory note. I keep it in a safe place now. Not because I expect to need it again. Because it reminds me of something. Not the money. Not the lawsuit. Not Terrence. It reminds me that my mother left me more than an inheritance. She left me the ability to stand on my own when someone I trusted decided not to stand beside me. The first time Terrence told me my father wasn't his problem, I thought I had lost a husband. Years later, I understand that I lost something much smaller. An illusion. The belief that the man I married was the man I thought he was. My father survived. My mother's money came back. The hidden business disappeared. The marriage ended. And I learned how to stop chasing people who had already shown me they were willing to walk away. I don't hate Terrence. I don't wish him misery. I don't spend my mornings wondering where he is or who he's with. I simply don't care anymore. And strangely enough, that's the most peaceful part. Because revenge wasn't watching him lose his business. Revenge wasn't the court judgment. Revenge wasn't the 41 missed calls. The real victory was waking up one morning and realizing I no longer needed anything from him. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not permission to move on. Nothing. My father once told me that paper doesn't forget what people say. He was right. But I've learned something else. People don't always need to tell you who they are with a confession. Sometimes they tell you in one sentence. Sometimes it's 4 words spoken when you need them most. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can spend years explaining why they didn't mean it. Or you can believe them. I chose to believe him. And that choice cost me my marriage. But it gave me my peace back. Sometimes the last goodbye isn't the moment you walk away. Sometimes it's the moment you finally stop waiting for someone to become the person you needed them to be. And sometimes, the most painful ending is also the first honest beginning.